Continuing from where Carson left off, I'll be talking about our modern day fight with invasive species, and this will cover the time frame between the 1990s to just around 2019. Focusing on provincial legislature in Ontario, there are 5 pieces of legislation that focus on combating invasive species. These 5 include the Great Lake Protection Act, the Invasive Species Act, the Forestry Act, the Pesticide Act, and the Weed Control Act. The various acts look to combat the 4 categories of invasive species that are listed in Canada, done by the Invasive Species Centre. 2 of the species are similar in that they're both aquatic, and they're both combated by the same legislature. This would be invasive fish and invasive aquatic plants. Both of these invasive species are regulated and combated by the Great Lakes Protection Act. The primary source for the introduction and spread of aquatic invasive species, especially refers to the Great Lakes and the St. Lawrence River, is ballast water. So, in order to combat this spread, regulatory practices were implemented so that any vessel or boat, upon transportation into Canada, would have to flush their tanks with salt water prior to entering. By flushing their tanks with salt water, shipping vessels can flush out the invasive species that are typically found lying within their cargo, their ballast water, or on their hulls. The Great Lakes Ballast Water Working Group reported that 97.9% of boats complied with these regulations, and thus limiting and managing the spread of aquatic invasive species. The next invasive species would be invasive plants. Invasive plants are regulated through the Plant Protection Act, the Weed Control Act, and the Pesticides Act. The Pesticides Act regulates the use of pesticides in Ontario. It informs people on which pesticides can and cannot be used to combat the spread of invasive species without causing more harm to the ecosystem. The Weed Control Act and the Plant Protection Act limit and restrict the type of seeds and plants that can be bought and grown within Canada. The Weed Control Act has a list of 25 weeds that are deemed noxious to the environment. And of these 25 weeds, 4 of them are also invasive species. These 4 being the dog strangling vine, European buckthorn, the giant hogweed, and the wild parsnip. When dealing with plants and weeds, there are 3 different methods that can be used to combat the spread of these invasive theories. The first being manual control. This is a more hands-on approach and includes digging, flooding, burning, and hand pulling to remove invasive species. This method is, however, most useful on small infestations, as it does not prove effective for larger populations. For larger infestations, the mechanical control methods can be used, and this entails using tools and or machines to mow, hoe, cut, till, chop, or construct barriers to fight and combat invasive plants. The last method, and probably the most effective of the 3, would be chemical control. This method pertains to invasive plants as well as invasive insects, which we will talk about next, but it involves the use of pesticides, herbicides, fungicides, and insecticides to combat the spread of invasive species. The last category of invasive species listed by the Invasive Species Centre of Canada would be the invasive insects. Invasive insects are regulated and combated by the Forestry Act. This act regulates forest management, control, and sale in Ontario. The Act grants the Ontario Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry the ability to prevent, manage, or eradicate forest infestations as they see fit. Now that we're on the topic of insects, I can talk about my favorite invasive species, which would be the Asian longhorn beetle. Like COVID, the Asian longhorn beetle is a native to China and found its way to North America through transportation of wooden pallets and wood packaging material in cargo shipments from Asia to North America. These little fucks are highly destructive wood-boring pests. They were discovered in America around the early 1990s. They have no effective predator, so not being able to contain them poses big risks for the ecosystem. The first reported outbreak of Asian longhorn beetles was detected in Toronto in 2003. Mechanical methods were used to eradicate the infestation. All infested trees found between 2003 and 2004 were removed, and the wood was chipped. In addition, over 12,000 nearby trees that were considered high risk were also chopped down and chipped. The method that was used to get rid of these Asian longhorn beetles was proven very successful, seeing as how there was not another outbreak until 2014 in Mississauga, which was handled with the exact same mechanical method that it was handled the first time.